I'd like to welcome everyone to this Zoom meeting this evening. As you know, we have approximately 288 tons of salt and soil that were dumped into the Rio Rancho landfill. And this material included high amounts of radioactive material and arsenic, among other chemicals. And the facts about this incident were recently brought to the public's attention by Mr. Eddie Paulsgrove, a resident of Rio Rancho, a retired geologist, and the Army Corps with the Army Corps of Engineers and former federal regulator. He has graciously offered to make this presentation, and we thank him so very much for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, Eddie Paulsgrove.
Hi, thank you, Elaine, and hello, everybody. Eleanor, Senator, Mr. Pope, and of course, Don, my pizza and beer buddy. So glad you all could make it. And Janice, I see your name. I'm not sure, but if you're there, I'm glad you're there. Yeah, my name is Eddie Paulsgrove. I am a geologist. I retired from the Corps of Engineers about 7 years ago. I retired as a senior project manager in the regulatory division. And what that means is that I administered and enforced part of the Clean Water Act for the state of New Mexico. I've worked in the environmental field, the geotechnical field. I've worked in the hazardous, toxic, and radiological waste field, all with the Corps, and I've spent a lot of time in the field. So I wanted to give everyone just a brief idea of my background. And yes, this material, Elaine, if we could put up that first slide, and then we can talk through it. But I wanted to just jump right in. I appreciate the next slide. And what I wanted to do is, I don't know if you all have seen this presentation that I put together, but I wanted to walk through it because some of it can be a little bit confusing. But the bottom line is, let me see if I can. Hang on just a second. Yeah, there we go. There we go. What I wanted to do is bring up the very first part of it is basically the bottom line up front. Why are we all sitting here? Why are we having this meeting to begin with? And the reason is, back in March of 2018, Elaine was correct. There were 288 tons of material that can be classified as technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material. The acronym is TENORM. I've also identified it as a toxic salt, and it was excavated from evaporative ponds at the briny well sites out west of Rio Rancho. Some of you folks may be aware, Eleanor, I believe you may be aware of the deep briny wells that were drilled back in 2007 by the county in order to try to develop a water resource for future development. Now, these wells, it turned out, were something called artesian wells, which means the water that they found in the aquifer was under so much pressure that it just shoved it to the top and came flowing out of the wellhead itself, just and real hot, under a lot of pressure. So they took samples of this material and found out that it had a large content of radium-226, radium-228, and other radionuclides. Now, one of the important things to recognize here is that this very first bullet item, this 288 tons, was actually conveyed to the landfill from out by the Laguna Puebla, where these wells are drilled, in 43 dump truck loads. Now, whether or not the people actually knew what they were hauling can be up for debate. That I'll leave that up to the New Mexico Environment Department to conduct their enforcement or their inquiries on. However, 43 dump truck loads were driven down Northern Boulevard in the middle of town undoubtedly with dust and other contaminant sources just coming out of the bed of that dump truck, 43 loads of it. So just the very initial phase of this is concerning. The fact that there wasn't taken, there weren't precautions taken, or at least recognition of this material. Yeah, let's go back to, I'll finish this bullet. We'll get to that map in just a second. So the TENORM was actually in the form of the toxic salt. And like I say, the radium and arsenic contents were significant. I mean, they were really high, many times in excess of what the maximum state and federal standards are for both disposal and drinking water, of course. So as the last bullet item notes, there are 3 schools, a preschool, numerous houses, businesses, all within a 1-mile radius. And let's go to that map now, Elaine, if you would. All within a 1-mile radius. And I just pulled this right off of Google Earth. As you can see, the landfill is just the basic center of it's almost like these schools were designed to be the radius of the hub, with the landfill as the hub. It's just, now of course, this landfill is old enough to where most of the development that you're seeing on the screen wasn't in existence. The high school, the middle school, the preschool, a lot of the homes and businesses. This was probably barren ground at the time. So at the time, it was not, such a dangerous thing. And a municipal landfill in itself, whether or not it should be accepting radioactive material as a fill material. They're not supposed to receive radioactive waste. So let's go to that second slide with the text here. And I just have some more basic bottom line up front. The problem I'm having here, the problem I think that we're all going to actually have, is the material was taken there, whether or not it was an acceptable material. But the problem we're having is the evaluation of that material. We've got one of the biggest issues I'm having is with New Mexico Environment Department. They have decided arbitrarily, in my mind, to accept the very lowest arsenic reported data on record. And they're using that data to establish just how contaminated this material is. My sense, and in my career with the Corps of Engineers, is that when you've got a set of data, a series of data, all coming from the same type of methodology in the lab, they just are fluctuating data, but they're all as valid as one as the other. Then if you're worried about public safety and welfare and health, you pick the highest of the concentrations to evaluate with. You take your worst case scenario, or at least take the range, the lowest, the highest, in the middle. You set a range of values and you see what you come up with. You do the appropriate math. I've done the math in a few of these slides down below, and I'm happy to discuss those with you. And as we come down to this second bullet item, what I'd like to make a point of right now, and it leads me into an important point, is this issue is kind of an evolving issue. Some things have changed, some for the better, some for the worse. Now this, the bullet item here where the landfill pumps and sprays the leachate that collects at the liners. What I was given to understand is that leachate would actually get sprayed every 2 years. Not the case. It's routinely pumped and sprayed from different subsurface pumping areas at the landfill and redistributed and sprayed as dust control on the landfill itself. So that's one of the problems. That's kind of an evolving, that's a bad thing. That's a very bad thing. If we're having this leachate pumped from collection pits underneath the landfill and redistributed on the ground every month or so, and we haven't ever tested any of that leachate for radioactivity, then I think we have an inherent problem right off the bat that needs to be resolved, and needs to be resolved with the assistance of New Mexico Environment. So that's one of the bad things. The bad thing that evolved is the leachate is being sprayed more frequently. One of the good things that we found out is I challenged New Mexico Environment Department on the quantity of this contaminated water that formed this salt. I said it was a great big amount, and we have a little bit of that here in the next calculations. They said no, it's not a big amount. They actually agreed with me over a period of weeks in their calculations, and it came to be that there is in the neighborhood of over 21 million liters of this highly contaminated water that it took to derive this 288 tons of contamination. So the New Mexico Environment Department, apparently they have not at this point in time finished their investigation. They apparently, as far as I know, have not implemented enforcement actions. They've identified the generator of this material. They think they know who the haulers were. And at this point in time, the New Mexico Environment Department feels that everything's fine. Feels like the landfill is in good hands. After a review, I tend to disagree with their assessment. New Mexico Environment Department doesn't appear to be willing to try to implement measures to deter future similar actions, like bringing in hundreds of tons of highly contaminated salt sediment into a municipal landfill surrounded by schools and homes and businesses. We could just go down to that next slide real quick, Elaine, and I'll just get a little bit of the background of how this came to be. Back in January of 2019, there was a corrective action report, a study that was done as requested from the Environment Department out west of Rio Rancho, where these briny wells were, because these briny wells are so corrosive. They ate through the wellheads, and the artesian water just spilled all into the arroyos on its way down to the Laguna Pueblo. So the Environment Department caused to have happen this corrective action plan. Well, this corrective action plan indicated that contaminated soil, arsenic contaminated soil, was taken to the landfill. Okay, well, when they said that, it took me a while to kind of glom onto that idea, but I requested copies of the landfill manifest so that I could get an idea of how much contaminated soil was actually taken there. Well, the manifest that I got indicated the 43 truckloads of something only identified as salt. Subsequent to my asking Environment Department about this, the generator of the material said, you know what? We made a mistake. We didn't take that contaminated soil to the landfill. We took all this salt from the evaporation pond. Right at that time, I knew this is the worst thing that could have happened. That stuff was worse than the soil would have been, which lends to the idea of why would they take something that they're saying is harmless, salt, to a landfill? 43 truckloads. Why would they do that? Why would they spend upwards of $20,000 to excavate, to mobilize and demobilize trucks and employees over a period of 2 weeks to get all this taken out there? If it was just salt and soil, it didn't make any sense, and it still doesn't. And to this day, I've never received a good answer of why they felt it was necessary to take this material to a landfill. They had 100 acres just wide open out there. They took it to the landfill. So that, to me, right to the beginning, was very questionable. The salt, like I say, was found to have very high radionuclide content as well as arsenic. And the fact that they extracted the water from the wells and let it evaporate and consolidate and concentrate those contaminants creates the situation that characterizes this material as a TENORM, that technologically enhanced material. Now, one thing, and everyone will agree at the New Mexico Environment Department, is that last summer, the New Mexico Environment Department sent an email to the EPA, and they stated to the EPA that, yes, this briny water did contain high levels of radium-226, 228, and arsenic, along with other radionuclides. So we know right off the bat, and the New Mexico Environment Department knows, that this material is the concentrate of high levels of radium-226 and 228. But the problem is this material was given an innocuous characterization of salt. There was never any laboratory analysis done of this material as required by the landfill. So, were procedures followed like they should have been? It doesn't appear to be, no matter what NMED says. It doesn't appear that this was actually just the innocuous disposal of salt and soil. No, everyone knows that there's high levels of radiation in this material. So here on this map, let's go to that map one more time, Elaine. Now here, again, you see where the schools are. Well, in the smaller, right towards the center, our city water, there's a city water well, and I believe that may be the injection for the gray water. That may not be, it may be, I'm not quite sure, but they've got storage tanks and they've got their well pumping housing there. So, and this area, as you can see, this area has developed significantly, and there are plans for additional homes to the north of the landfill. So let's go to that, the first calculation, the page after, yeah, that right there. Now this I put in here because people were asking me that. They would say, Eddie, how do you know any of this? How can you make this determination? Well, when it comes to determining the water quantity that it took to form all this terrible salt, we had enough information. We had enough data from previous lab work that I could calculate the water quantity. Like I say, over time, NMED has agreed. And so now this whole page, I used this whole page to convince NMED. Apparently it may have worked, but they do agree with us now. So this disagreement between NMED and us is now for Mox Nix. It doesn't matter anymore. So let's go to the next page down. And I'll try to get to the next page down below that. I'll try to get to some of these questions. I'm happy to answer all of them if I can. Now this is actually trying to determine the arsenic content. The arsenic content, again, straightforward, simple math. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but we had 3 different data sets, all using the same data methods from different labs. And as you can see, without doing a lot of the calculations, we have large fluctuations of data. The data fluctuates. The contaminants in this briny water that forms this salt can fluctuate based on different variables. So there isn't a consistent point where we can say this is the amount of contamination that we have. Everything's going to be kind of a guesstimate. So if your guesstimate, if you want to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public, your guesstimate is at the higher end of the fluctuations of data. If you have another agenda, then you pick the lowest point of data. Let's go down to just this radium. Let's go to the radium, the one above that, Elaine. Now this one here is probably the most important part because the total radium content, no, back here to, yeah, right, nope, next one down, there, yeah. The total radium content, what we have here is we're able to backtrack and extrapolate the concentration of radium in this material based on the quantity of water and based on the concentration of the radium itself in the water. Using the higher, more dangerous levels at our laboratory reports, we come up with concentrations that calculate to over 7 picocuries per gram. Now the picocuries, a very small measurement, a trillionth of a curie of. And what's a curie? It's a mass, but a picocurie is a very small amount. But the thing to remember is that radium contamination is measured by the trillionth of a curie. It's measured by picocuries. So yes, we're operating on picocuries. Now the maximum federal soil standard, as established by the Department of Energy, for specifically for uranium tailings that would have radium in it, is only 5 picocuries per gram. So what we've got is this material, in all likelihood, could very well have far exceeded federal standards for radium contamination in a solid material like soils, salts, or whatever else. Now we got to think back. We've got 43 truckloads hauling this stuff up and down Northern Boulevard through the past schools, past homes, 43 times without a lot of thought given to it. So let's go down to the table real quick, and you'll see this isn't going to be a very long presentation, really. So the tables here we've set up. What we've done is we've taken the top table is the radium in soil standards, federal standards by the Department of Energy, and you can see the radium in the soil that we calculate using the higher data is over 7 picocuries per gram. The standard is 5 picocuries per gram. When we get down, the second is the arsenic. And in every case, the arsenic contamination, even using the Environment Department's least damaging numbers, are still well over the standard of residential contamination. So based on both the radium contamination as well as the arsenic contamination, it's clear to me that this material should never have been taken to a municipal landfill sited where it is in the midst of developed communities and schools and everything else. So let's go down. Let's skip the next slide, skip that one. And well, put this photo in there just real quick, and this is one of the ponds that were excavated. This is one of the ponds that was out at the well site. And you can kind of see this, I believe this photo was in 2009, I think, something to that effect. And you can see that you can see that the ponds were used. They've got discharge hoses, and significant amount of salt is already accumulated at the bottom. So this is the material that they're saying that they basically took. Let's go to that next text slide. Yeah, that one there. Now, one of the things that I have an issue with is I have an issue with NMED showing bias and also appearing to be arbitrary and capricious in their decision making. One of the main problems I have, like I've said, is that they took the very lowest analytical data on record out of multiple lab results and used the very lowest data they could find to try to say that the contamination and the exposure is minimal, not to worry about it. Well, from my time in the government, and I'm sure anybody that's worked in government, anybody that holds a decision-making capacity knows that you always err on the side of public safety. You don't take things for granted and make an assumption and then try to create that as a fact when there's a variety of variables to pick from. You can't pick the lowest. You start with the highest and work your way down. Or you make the selection, you evaluate all the data you have, but you don't just pick the lowest and go with it. You just don't do that. The NMED has not required Waste Management Landfill to conduct any leachate radionuclide testing to pump and spray. Now, to me, that's a no-brainer. I mean, now that radioactive material has been introduced into the landfill, then you have to test anything coming off that landfill or any kind of leachate for radioactive material. And for whatever reason, both the landfill, apparently, and NMED are more than just reluctant to not require the testing. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, one of the other reasons that we really need to test, well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that and say on our conclusions, what we need to do. Now, like I say, when it comes to enforcement, right now, I'm not worried about enforcement. I'm not worried about guilty parties. I'm not worried about that. But somebody did this. And this isn't going to be, if it needs cleaning, it isn't going to be cheap if it needs cleaning. But even just doing the testing, the fact that we didn't know, somebody did this. We need to know who did it. NMED knows who did it. And we need to know some kind of process to hold people accountable for their bad decisions. That's just a bottom line. Let's go to that very last conclusion page. And conclusions that I have, and I'm going to supplement that a little bit, and I'm going to add a little bit here too. But the conclusions that I have are that the public actually is going to have to step up. I've tried to work with the city of Rio Rancho. They're more than reluctant. I felt somewhat adversarial on this issue. I could feel that, and they told me under no uncertain circumstances they are not involved in this whatsoever. City of Rio Rancho says this is all a state thing, state licensed. It's a private company, and they are not going to do anything about it. In my opinion, my own opinion, is that this is within city limits. This could be a danger to the health, welfare, and safety of the public. The city of Rio Rancho should be involved. They have the right and the responsibility, I believe. Now they'll differ on that, and I'm not going to quibble with them because, like I say, I felt they were a little adversarial towards me on this, and I don't need that. I don't need that. So, in my opinion, again, the toxic salt, the TENORM material should never have gone to the landfill itself. I think it was and remains a potential danger to the community. And what this third bullet item here, this was before we knew that the leachate does actually get sprayed on the landfill. It does get sprayed. So we need to immediately try to find out how we can require leachate testing before any more gets sprayed to just see. I mean, all we're looking for now is data, right? We're not saying you've got to close down the landfill. We're not saying anything like that. What we are saying is, hey, we need data. We need some testing. We need some analysis done because there are indications that this could be extremely dangerous stuff. Now, public awareness is critical. I'm glad we could do this maybe live on the Facebook and every other bit here that get the word out that we can, so that people understand there is potential danger in the sense of 500 million picocuries at a minimum posited in the landfill in March of 2018. That's the minimum, 500 million picocuries. Where's it going to go? Well, if it goes to the leachate and they pump it on the ground surface, then where might it go at that point? New Mexico and Rio Rancho, we have a very windy area. My fear is that with the close proximity of schools and homes and everything that we have, that we could end up with a wind-driven contaminant vector. Without anybody really, nobody wants that to happen. But if we have high enough quantities, concentrations in that leachate, and they're spreading it for dust control, well, if you take highly contaminated fluid and you put it on dust, then you've got highly contaminated dust. I don't understand. To me, that's not rocket science, but it could be science with regards to a wind vector for contamination. Now, New Mexico Environment Department has told me in a phone conversation that flat out said, if you find high contamination in that leachate, it won't be because of the March 2018 disposal action. That lends itself to my mind to be, well, there must be prior disposal actions then. Is that what they're trying to tell me? So, and I would imagine that there probably were. If there were, then we really need to sample the leachate now, because if we get high radioactive readings in the leachate and our 500 million picocuries hasn't even entered into the scene yet, then we've got something called a cumulative impact problem. We could have a problem where a large amount of material is cumulatively causing a bigger problem than individually they would have. For example, I'll give you a brief example. If you've got 100 units of something and nothing can exceed that 100, that's the maximum that we can accept. Well, if you've got a guy, somebody over here with 30, they got 40, 30, 50, 60, well, none of it exceeded 100, we should all be fine, right? Well, that's the issue that we could have here. We just don't know, because again, they don't test for radioactivity, radionuclides in the leachate, in the soils, anywhere on that site. So to me, that's the biggest problem. Now, I'll go real quick here. New Mexico Environment Department has come out with an exposure calculation. And what they're talking about is, if you're on that site and there's this radium, are you going to be exposed to radioactivity in quantities that could harm you? Now, I don't doubt that their calculation, although they're using wrong data, but even using the higher data, I would imagine that the radioactive levels ambient out on site are probably not in and of itself, from what was put out there, so much in excess that it would cause a problem for just existing radioactivity on the site. I don't know. We need analysis. However, if we're talking about previous, and we're talking about the 2018 disposal, then now we may have an issue where there could be enough radioactivity out there to be pushing our meter up, to be of a concern. We don't know. We just don't know. So the bottom line, when we're looking at things that need to be done, we need to test the leachate. We need to sample the soils. We need to make sure that we keep a close eye. I guess I left this out. At the landfill, they have 4 monitoring wells. They've got 2 on the upstream side and 2 on the downstream side. Well, they don't test for radioactivity, so we don't know. Again, we need to get everybody on the bandwagon, in my opinion, like yesterday, to start requiring monitoring well sampling to make sure that the radionuclides are tested. We need to make sure that the soil is tested. We need to make sure all these things are happening. And Elaine, have you been taking track of these questions? I hope I've seen them come up. I haven't written them. I don't know, but I'm sure we can open this up for everybody. Really, everybody, that is the information that I wanted to present. I didn't want to take up a lot of time. Don, you're muted, buddy. There, you're still muted, Don.
Okay. How about that? So, Don, unmute yourself.
How's that?
There you
go. I'm also a geologist, and I want to point out a couple of things that I think Eddie is too nice to say. I, on the other hand, think that we've got a lot of facts here that need to be brought to the public's attention. The first thing is that what NMED has said is that this does not meet the definition of radioactive waste, so they don't have to do anything about it and aren't going to do anything about it. I don't think that's true. from the EPA website, it says, as defined in the United States, there are 5 general categories of radioactive waste. The first 4 are more related to industrial activities and nuclear, activity. But the 5th one is called technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive material, or TENORM, and that is basically defined as naturally occurring radioactive materials that have been concentrated or exposed to the accessible environment as a result of human activities such as manufacturing, mineral extraction, or water processing. Now, what happened out there was that the briny water was extracted from 2 wells that were artesian in nature, and they contained far in excess of the standard maximum contaminant levels set by the federal government and the state of New Mexico. And Eddie has already pointed out so that this material meets the EPA's definition of naturally occurring radiological material. Okay, so when that stuff, the briny water from the 2 wells was pumped into these evaporative ponds or pits by the on-site operator, and the water was then allowed to evaporate. Well, after the water evaporated, the radium ions attached to the salt. That process resulted in a much higher concentration of radium in the solid waste than it was in the water alone. So this material now meets the definition of TENORM, which means it was highly concentrated by human activity. So in effect, this was radioactive waste that was dumped in the landfill. And I'd also like to point out that this was done illegally. Now you can go check the statutes, and I've got a couple of quotes here from the Radiation Protection Act from the state of New Mexico, and there are 2 things it says in there. According to that, it's unlawful for a person to possess, use, store, dispose of, manufacture, or anything else any radioactive material unless he holds a license. There was no license that was granted to do this. The other one, it's also unlawful for a person to possess, use, store, dispose of, manufacture, process, repair, or alter unless someone has gotten a permit for this. It's stated in 2 places. And, basically the NMED is not holding anybody accountable. It was illegal what they did. That stuff is very dangerous out there. And you point out when it's sprayed onto the surface, it can become airborne. Not only that, but it's not just the radioactive material. It's arsenic. There are very high concentrations of arsenic out there, and arsenic can also become airborne. And it is not only a poison, but a carcinogen. And when this stuff floats down, the rainwater gets it and it floats down and accumulates at the bottom, and that stuff's called leachate. And if there's a break in the liner, that material can get out, that leachate can get out into the subsurface and into the water wells. And that's true, and that is something that needs to be taken into account here. And I'd also like to point out, if it's all right, that there are a couple of things in here where NMED on the KRQE interview came out and said, well, there's nothing to worry about. We don't have any evidence at this time to show that there's an imminent threat to health, but the NMED does have evidence. And Eddie has given them that evidence and brought it to their attention. They're double checking all of the regulatory requirements. Well, I just read 2 of them to you that are obvious regulatory requirements. The public shouldn't worry about the wind blowing around harmful fumes. They said, well, if it was dumped on the surface, the public should be worried about that. Here's another thing that the representative said, there's not a danger to human exposure at this time. Well, you know what? I don't know how any NMED could make a statement like that unless they actually went out there and measured the air and the contents of the landfill and how much radioactive material is in there and how much may have gotten down into the leachate. So they can't make that statement it's just not accurate. And whether the radioactive material is actually hazardous waste is something the department is investigating. Well, we've already brought it to their attention that it does meet the definition of radioactive waste. And if you go online, look at the landfill, look at the state laws and federal laws, you cannot deposit and dump radioactive waste in a landfill in New Mexico without a permit. And they didn't get a permit. So there you go.
Well, one of the things about the landfill is they state that they don't accept materials with PCBs or mercury. Well, there's good reason. It's dangerous stuff. Has no business in a municipal landfill surrounded by schools and homes. The same token goes here. You got PCBs, they're dangerous. They're carcinogens. You get radium-226. If you inhale it, which is the most hazardous way to contract contamination, 226 contamination, radium-226, it goes into your bone marrow, and then it's not coming out. It's in there. So it is a danger. Now I do want to say one thing. I saw Mr. Pope's question. It stuck in my mind is, were there any other disposals after March 2018? We don't know. I mean, we wouldn't have known about this one if I hadn't have gone into and requested the manifests and then done, I don't know, a ton of research on this. We wouldn't have known about this one. So there's really no telling how many other disposal actions have occurred, which lends itself to the fact that we need data. We need data. I couldn't stress this more. We need data more than anything. One thing about to the senator's question, you had mentioned on one of the questions whether or not the people in the neighborhood had been made aware of this disposal. And to that question, I don't have a good answer. I mean, I've done everything I can to get the word out, but as to, I don't know. So I couldn't answer that. So, and I see from Mr. Pope, yeah, it's my concern. My concern as well is that it's happened. It may have happened before, it may have happened after. And again, that comes to the cumulative impact question. How much is too much? Well, I think this disposal itself was too much. But how much after that? How much before that? At what point are we going to just say, well, this is going to be a super fun thing? Well, we don't know. We don't have any data. We really need a lot of data, and we need as many people like yourselves that can help create the opportunity to gather that data. That's all we're asking, is just to allow us to get data, so.
Eddie?
Yes.
I just want to make one comment, and that is that we do have some initial data. And you've shown that data that the measurements for both radium and arsenic are above the maximum standard health levels set by the United States government. And the reason they set those things is because if you go above that, it's dangerous to human health. That's why they set those in the first place. So we know that initially we've got dangerous material in there to human health. I think what we need to do now is we need to test the landfill to make sure we know where the extent of this radioactive material is within the landfill, how far down it's gotten. And, if it's in the leachate, for crying out loud, and they go and they spray it right back on the surface, then it gets blown out in the wind again. That's the data we need. We already know that this material is dangerous. Right.
And that's good. We need to know what has happened, where that material is, how it's moved, and how it's drained. If the radium and arsenic, if these contaminants were held within the salt matrix, all the bad stuff was in salt. Well, you get groundwater and rainwater, it's more acidic in nature. It dissolves the salt, releases the radium, releases the arsenic to travel to however it's going to travel. Eleanor, I saw your question, and when I spoke with NMED, they floated the idea of testing nearby, especially domestic, single home well users. Because my concern is like what Dawn had mentioned. If there's a breach in the liner, then this material could easily travel to the shallow aquifer that would not be too terribly deep beneath the lowest part of the pit where the leachate collects. So my concern would be if there is a breach of some kind, and most everything that humans do is going to fail at some point in some fashion. So this material, it's man-made material, it can fail. If it does, if there's a breach, then it will. And the gradient from that, from the landfill would convey the groundwater towards the Rio Grande into areas that have numerous domestic wells, shallow aquifer well users. So that would be my concern as well. Yes, there should be, after 2 years, there's no telling. Again, if we could, oh, yeah, well, yeah, I see you have a, yeah. We need to get some input. We need some data. I mean, yeah, should homeowners have to test their individual water wells for radium and pay for it themselves? I don't think so. That doesn't seem right to me. You know, this, even though it's a naturally occurring material, it was extracted from very deep underground, allowed to consolidate and concentrate on the surface, and then, in my mind, surreptitiously taken to the landfill, given a misidentifying name and dumped there, and people walked away. So, but again, you know, my concern here at this stage, right now we're in phase 1, I believe. That's what this is, phase 1. Phase 1 is going to be to acknowledge we have a potential problem. We have a potential problem. We do have material that is dangerous, that is in close proximity to schools and homes. We have this material that could possibly be being sprayed out on the ground. Could be, even though it's within an enclosed system, it's still subject to the vagaries of wind. Can still be transported, who knows, you know, not definitely to schools and homes. So we need an intensive investigation to be conducted at this site. And we need it yesterday. And we need the wholehearted support, proactive support of the state agencies and the landfill and the city, in my mind, to get this done. So I see Jessica Hill has this comment of where the leachate, where does it get sprayed? Well, it gets sprayed within, on the ground surface at the landfill itself. So ideally, the spraying occurs from a large water truck with the spray apparatus very close to the ground to minimize the opportunity of aerosol movement in that regard. Now, you know, I'm trying to be fair about all of it. I'm just going to be fair. They say they do their best, and I imagine they probably do, but they're dealing with dynamite anyway. So they only spray it within their facility. So that facility is like a great big bowl. So the liner acts as the bowl itself. All the debris is the cereal in the bowl, I guess. And I guess the leachate is the milk. I don't know. I'm not very good at these analogies, but yeah. The liner.
When was it created? Yeah. When did they create the liner? How long has it been? You know, these things need to be replaced. How do they do that? You know, what would entail them cleaning this up? What, you know, do they have to dig this stuff out and transport it somewhere else because it shouldn't be there? Well, and what cost at, I'm sure that's what the city's looking at, is that here's a cost of, and who's going to foot that. And usually this is the taxpayers that end up doing that. And I don't know, I didn't know about the monitoring wells. I'm very concerned about our municipal wells and whether or not that has got there. So if they're going to test, I know that there are domestic wells within a half mile to a mile of the leachate pond. And people on Facebook have said that they're very concerned about those domestic wells around the landfill. I don't understand why the city wouldn't take into consideration the health and safety of their residents here, and demand the testing that needs to be done by the state. And I think that we can't say yet whether or not our water is contaminated, but if this was 2 years ago and there's been a lot of rain and snow and all that stuff percolates down, and then you've had spraying going on top of it, and there's runoff that happens that goes down into arroyos and everything else that come off of that landfill. It doesn't all go into the leachate pond.
It goes into the leachate. I mean, this whole, when you look at the landfill, it's like I say, it's a bowl. All the side slopes, if you look at the landfill, everything slopes into the landfill. So any runoff comes into the landfill, into the leachate. So,
they spray on that Carpenter Road. They spray up behind Lowe's. They come down that road. They're not just up on top of the landfill spraying. They're spraying all around there.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Eddie, can I ask a question? Yeah. As I understand how this works, the material that was put in there, the radioactive material and the arsenic are adhered to the salt. So what happens is the water percolates down and it has to dissolve the salt to actually take the poisons and the toxic material down into the leachate. So there's some time here. We don't know how long that takes, right?
Okay.
We don't.
We're time dependent, and that's why we need to test it. Because it might not be down to the leachate yet, but then it might be. But what we do know is it's a ticking time bomb. Now, the question I have for you is that if the leachate is contaminated and they go up there and they spray it on the surface, a lot of people go out there to dump stuff, right? Rio Rancho people and out there. By touching that stuff or inhaling it, can they get sick?
Well, the inhalation part specifically, when you ingest radium, your body will expel a considerable part of the contamination through the bodily process. When you inhale it, you don't eliminate it. It's bioaccumulative at that point, like arsenic, and it's only going to get worse. When we start talking about and back to Elaine's part of removing the material and the cost of all that, man, that is so far beyond anything that I've looked into or know anything about. I wouldn't even begin to suggest what that might be. Right now, this whole meeting here, as far as my conception was just to set up a knowledge base, make sure people are aware of the fact that this happened. It's highly contaminated material, dangerous material in and of itself, and it's out there in the landfill. We need more data. We need a lot of data. The senator mentioned something. Yeah, I agree. But Senator, I promise you, I have done my very best cajoling, convincing, presenting data. I've done everything I can to have NMED commit to requiring or asking the landfill to voluntarily do this. They should be good neighbors. They're in our community. They should be stepping up to the plate saying, you know what? We didn't know. We really didn't. Let's get to testing. Let's see what's going on. So.
Well, there's another question here that Harold Pope, who he is a candidate for Senate in what district? District, let me see, 23. And he will, we're hoping that he replaces Senator Rue in the upcoming election. And he's been very concerned about some of the environmental issues that we're facing. And he wrote here, well, you asked the question, Harold, because I'm sure since you wrote this question, you might have a couple others. Are you unmuted? I think you are.
He's still muted.
Oh, he is? You need to unmute.
There he is.
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry about that. And I'm wondering which question, because I thought.
It says, why would this material need to be dumped or removed from its
Yeah.
origin?
So that's a question of mine. So let me start off a little bit of my background. I'm a biochemistry undergrad. I have a master's in pharmaceutical chemistry. Worked in the Air Force as a program manager, acquisitions officer, and a chemist. So I really love the presentation. And what I'm really concerned about is not only what's been done here, but we put a lot of people at risk even transporting this material. This is soil, and the wind and the way things happen here. This stuff could be all over, you know, pretty much Rio Rancho, parts of New Mexico right now. So not only we don't know the risk there, we haven't tested other parts, you know, outside. This stuff could have been dumped and left in some other places. We don't know how many times this was dumped beforehand. We don't know if it happened last month, right? We just don't know. And I don't understand the resistance to finding out and getting the data and the information to find out what happened and then what we can do about it. Because without that data and information, we're not going to be able to remediate this situation. And I think there needs to be more transparency. You got schools there, you got things there. I mean, we make laws to make sure people aren't selling drugs near schools. And we're not going to be open and honest about a situation like this that's putting people's lives at risk. We're talking residential, we're talking schools. So this is a big concern of mine, and we have to really fight for this transparency. And I don't know if it's political or what's going on in Rio Rancho. I can't speak for that, and I don't expect you to. It could be taxpayer dollars, or they're worried about it, but we cannot act as if, you know, we see nothing, hear nothing, and we're just going to let it go, because eventually someone is going to be harmed by this, and it's going to come out, whether it be on the current administration, the mayor, Rio Rancho, what's going on there now. But this needs to be, we need to find out the information so that we can actually fix this. It's just going to cause further damage the longer we let this continue. So, and if they're right and we get the data, then and maybe the salts, maybe it hasn't gone down to the leachate, right? Right. Then at least we can do a process there, and we can limit the exposure. But we don't even have that information, and we just got to really fight for that.
Well, that's a very good point, sir. It's that's, you know, we could get the data back, and it could be somewhat innocuous. It could be, but all that would tell me is that, see, right now, the testing, the leachate gets tested every 2 years, regardless. Now, I have a copy of the leachate testing from 2018. And like I say, there are 8 different locations within the landfill, sumps, cells that collect the water. 2 of the cells from 2018 never got tested because there was not enough water. Those 2 cells probably were dispersed on the ground, and they hadn't collected water yet. Same thing will probably happen this time. But see, we can't, from now on, we can't go 2 years between testing. We can't have leachate dispersed on the ground every month or whatever without knowing what's, you know, going on. We have to establish some criteria. It's going to take some common sense, thoughtful thinking. That is the only way. That now, when it comes to the quantity of leachate, I really don't know. I don't know how much leachate we're actually talking about as to quantity that's sprayed out on the ground each month, each 2 months. It's routinely discharged on the ground, but we don't know what quantities. They don't have a rigid schedule. I asked NMED if there were any requirements, any standards that the landfill could not exceed, or any dilution rates that were required, anything like that. No. They said, no, we don't have any standards applicable to the landfill. They can pretty much run their own show, apparently, and that's what NMED has basically stated. Now, I want to make one point that to me indicates true as a federal employee. I'm sure you're familiar, and the senator's probably familiar with the arbitrary and capricious standard for decision making in government. To me, the decision making in this by the New Mexico Environment Department has truly been blatantly arbitrary and capricious. And I'll give you one great example. Like I said, in order for NMED to establish what they said was in that salt, the contamination, total radium, their minimum amount, they say, is 4 times the allowable state discharge in federal drinking water standards, 4 times. I say it's the data that we have that I would use is 17 times.
I'm trying to unmute you all. Let's see. Oh, allow them to unmute yourselves. Eleanor, do you have a question? No?
Go ahead, Eddie. I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, okay.
No, Antoinette wants to say something too. Go ahead,
Okay.
Eddie. Eddie's muted.
Okay.
He has to unmute himself.
Yeah, you have to unmute yourself now. There we go. Let's see, let me. There. Unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay.
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 Go ahead, Eddie.
All I wanted to say was 9 months ago, the New Mexico Environment Department conducted an exposure evaluation at the well site adjacent to the Laguna Pueblo. And they used the exact same data I'm using 9 months ago, the 85 picocuries per liter, a worst case scenario. Suddenly, for some reason, now they're not going to do that. They're not going to consider that. They're not going to do a range of evaluations. They're just doing one. So go ahead, Ellen. I just wanted to make that point of arbitrary and capriciousness. That's blatant.
Right, and I think we have to use some political pressure. Our state agencies have traditionally failed us for many, many years, and they are pretty much self-regulating. I don't think we're going to get support from the governor for any testing. I think, you know, Antoinette, we're going to have to put political pressure on them to act on this.
The one thing, I'm just going to say one thing. The only way this is going to be resolved, we can put as much political pressure as we want. The only way this will be resolved is through court. We'll have to make them do it through the court. We can put as much pressure as we'd like. I don't think they're going to do it. I'm sorry, Senator, go ahead, please. Elaine?
Unmute. You have to unmute yourself. Let's see. I've been trying to unmute all. Let's see. No. There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. I kept saying that I can't unmute myself because the host muted me.
Oh, okay.
Unmute me. Thank you. I have to say, Mr. Paulsgrove, that presentation was extremely powerful, and I really appreciated the comments by Mr. Phillips as well. It was just very, very good. I hope it was taped so that it can be played again and again and again. And then there is the issue of no permit being granted in the first place. I think that's it's a very important point about failure to comply with the law. I think you're right. We have to put political pressure and legal pressure. There's two kinds of pressure. You talked about the courts, and that is one kind of pressure. The other is political pressure. And I will certainly ask, that's why I wanted to come to this presentation, is because when the environmental department appears before me in hearings, any single one, and if they're listening, they should know, they should be aware that any single employee of that department, I'm going to ask them about this over and over and over again. I already sent an email to them, and I was told when they complete their report, I'll get a copy of the report. But that exactly what you said, that initially they didn't see an imminent harm to the public. And that is very troubling. And so like I said, every chance I get, and I really appreciated the comments, very, very senatorial, Mr. Pope. I think that's very, this is very important, and I really appreciate.
Oh. Hello. There we go. Are you up there? No. I'm sorry.
I don't know when I got muted, but anyway, I think I said what I needed to say.
Yeah, I heard, the last I heard is that when they come before us in committee, you're going to ask them these questions, and we didn't hear anything after that. Sorry. Ah!
Okay, there. I don't even know where that was, but I will ask them every time they become before the committee. Did you get where I had emailed them and asked them? Yes. Okay, so you got that part. And then I honestly, now I don't even remember, but I will definitely keep my eye on this, and I think we all need to. And again, I think I concluded by just thanking you for the presentation and thanking for the invitation to participate and to listen to it. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'm trying to, there we are. Okay, yes, Don.
There's a couple of questions that have been the same question that I think is very important to answer. And that's about what's involved in testing. Now, as Eddie said, you think about this as being a big bowl. So they came in there and they dumped this stuff. They may have dug a hole and put it in there, or they may have just dumped it on the surface and spread it out. But either way, the way to test this is to drill boreholes, put boreholes in the landfill, and that is not very expensive. Put boreholes in there and test each of the boreholes to get the limit of where this material is within the landfill. And if it hasn't gotten, you also test the leachate. If it hasn't gotten down into the leachate, and you can test the limits of where it is in the landfill, you can go in there and get it out. And that's what we need to do. And it's really not that difficult. I mean, Eddie, we were talking about this the other day with these what did you call those things? You've seen that happen in a landfill, Eddie? The tubes, putting tubes down into the ground.
I don't know. It keeps asking me
Okay, well, that's all right. That's all right. There is a sampling technique called Shelby tubes. You use continuous sampling, good data throughout, and really none of it's expensive. None of it would cost much money. So
there's no reason not to do it.
No reason not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not that expensive, and nobody's saying we should shut down the landfill.
Not yet. Not until we get data. We have to have data. We don't know anything. I don't want to react. I don't want to overreact. I don't want to underreact. I want an appropriate approach to gather data so we can make an informed, intelligent decision. That's all I want. Hi, Leah.
Hi, how is everybody doing?
Fine.
Do you have some questions, Leah? And Leah's running for county commission against Jay Block. And she's going to be our next county commissioner. And I think as a county person, this landfill is also in the county. You know,
Yes.
these commissioners can write letters. And
Yes.
yeah, so go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, definitely. They can write letters. They can be transparent, communicate with the state, with federal entities. And I live in Rio Rancho, and honestly, I didn't hear about this, you know, until Elaine brought it up and sent out, you know, information on this. So I agree with everything that's been said. I really don't have any specific questions, but I do agree, you know, we need data on what was dumped there and how it was dumped. We just need information on this. And one thing that I am on my platform, I talk a lot about protecting our water resources. I am against fracking as far as the oil and gas industry. And one of the main issues, I'm sure you all know, with fracking, what chemicals are injected into the earth, into our land. Same thing with this stuff. Like you were all saying, we need data. So I don't have any specific questions, but definitely it is a concern for my community. The other concern, I think, the other thing that the whole area should be concerned about is just the wind. You know, I was reading some of that data. We have terrible dust storms here in Rio Rancho. There's a lot of new development and not a lot of vegetation to keep down the dust. And where's that blowing? You know, Eleanor's in Corrales, Senator's in Albuquerque, I believe, Antoinette. So yeah, definitely, if elected, the environment is a primary concern. I come from the Navajo Nation. We know what's going on out there with water. So, you know, just making sure that we protect our environment, and this dumping at the Rio Rancho landfill is definitely concerning.
Good.
Yeah, unmute yourself. Try to unmute yourself because they asked me to do it.
Well, here we go. Finally. Thanks, Leah. Good to see you. Thank you for running. I saw something laughable, a video a couple of weeks ago where Commissioner Block said that he was all about the environment. So I thought that was a joke, but he's claiming that it's laughable. I forgot when I was talking last time to actually ask my question. So my concern is, why was that material even taken from that site? And then what is happening at that site right now? You're saying it's near Laguna. So to me, that's an issue that probably needs to be resolved at that site as well, right? With this material being there.
Your two-part question, the first part is one that I've never gotten a good answer to, which is, why did they take it there to begin with? The bottom line is, if it was so safe and so harmless, basically, then why would they spend it there?
Why would you move it?
Right. And why spend $20,000 or so to make that happen over a 2-week time? It doesn't make any sense, and it is a concern for me. Also, the issue of the on-site part out there, out at the well site, and all the spills and the contamination out there next to the Laguna Pueblo. I have been working with the Environment Department for 2 years to try to make sure that the drainage from all the contamination from the unauthorized and authorized spills out there, discharges, isn't conveyed to the arroyos and isn't conveyed onto the Laguna land. This site slopes to the Laguna Pueblo. I've been trying to communicate with the Pueblo for, I don't know, forever, just to be able to meet with them and show them a presentation. And I can't get anywhere at all. I don't know why, but for some reason I can't get anywhere. So that's a problem. So those are the only two
Okay,
answers I can really give.
we're getting close to the end, and we're going to have to wrap up some comments here. So, Don, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I want to answer Harold's question, which is a good question. The operator was going to start pumping more water from those wells, and they wanted to use the pits to pump the water in there. So they had to get rid of the stuff. And how would they get rid of it? Well, I think they took it to the landfill because it was inexpensive and cheap, and they could get away with it. And if they had admitted it was radioactive waste, they couldn't have done that, and they would have had to take it. The nearest radioactive dump site is in Texas, and that would have cost them a lot more money. And I'm pretty sure that's why they did that.
I have a question, Mr. Phillips or Eddie. I know you want data, but don't you think the people in the area with shallow domestic water wells really should know? And if they want to have their water tested, they should have the option now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Eddie.
No, I was going to say yes, absolutely. And in conjunction with that is I've put in a freedom of IPRA request with the state to obtain at least half a dozen of the previous well sampling. They have 4 monitoring wells on site. I don't know enough about them to give intelligent answers about it, other than they have the wells. We need to make sure that they're testing for radioactive material in those wells as well. But yes, if I had a shallow well, I'd be concerned. That's all I can, that's all I can really tell you. But yes, I agree with you. I do.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comment to wrap up?
I think we should contact New Mexico Environmental Law Center and the Western Environmental Law Center and take this to them and see if they will take it on.
I have also in the chat that will go out is all the email to all the city councilors and to the Environment Department. We are trying to figure out what all our alternatives are. I think that's a very good idea, Eleanor. And I think this went very well tonight. And this is our first presentation to the public. And I thank you all for attending tonight. And I hope that people are now more aware of what's happening in on our environment here in Rio Rancho and in the Albuquerque and what it's going to impact. Right?
Let me just add that if a lot of this material is complicated. I understand that I probably have tunnel vision and I may not have explained it as well as I should have. However, I'm happy to answer any questions. Do further Zoom meetings. I can try to break things apart a little better. I did kind of rush through it a little bit, but I'm happy to go into more detail as needed. If you guys need me, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, well, thank you. Our time's up tonight, and I thank you all for attending. And hopefully in the next month or so, when we have some more information, we can come back to this. So thank you very much. And thank you, Leah. Good to see you. Good to see you, Harold. Eleanor,
Good to see y'all.
Thank
Don.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Eleanor. Bye, Leah.
So much.
Nice meeting you, Edward and Don. Bye, Elaine.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.